Have you ever had your entire career erased in a single sentence? I did. And it was not because of poor performance, or missed deadlines, or even a failed project. No, I was told that after 12 years of loyalty, commitment, and results that spoke for themselves, I was being let go because I did not smile enough. That was the day my world collapsed, the day my confidence cracked open like glass under pressure, and the day I promised myself that one day, somehow, I would make them regret underestimating me. My name is Victoria Hale. I am 38 years old. I am from Denver, Colorado, and today I own a consulting firm that works with national retailers. But 2 years ago, in 2022, I was just another corporate employee walking into a storm I never saw coming. I remember that Tuesday morning as if it were carved into my memory with a knife. The sky was heavy and gray, as if it knew what was about to happen to me. I had arrived at Everlyn Retail Group's headquarters with my usual tote bag full of files, my laptop, and the quiet determination that always defined me. I was not the type to gossip in the break room or to wander the halls just to be seen. I was serious, focused, and I believed that results mattered more than appearances. Derek Mason, my boss, saw it differently. Derek was 44 years old, a tall man with a booming voice who thought that authority meant arrogance. He thrived on being noticed, on laughter that filled the halls, on appearances that looked good in boardrooms. I was never his favorite, but I thought my work spoke loudly enough. I was wrong. When his assistant told me that Derek wanted to see me in his office, I felt a strange tug in my stomach, the kind that whispers something bad is waiting. I stepped into his office, the air thick with the faint smell of his cologne. He leaned back in his leather chair with that self-satisfied grin, tapping a pen against the desk like he already knew the verdict he was about to deliver. "Victoria," he said slowly, "this company thrives on energy, and frankly, you just do not smile enough." At first, I froze. My heart stopped as my mind tried to catch up. Was this a joke? Was he seriously about to measure my 12 years of loyalty by the curve of my lips? I forced a nervous laugh, waiting for him to clarify, but he did not. His smirk only deepened as he pushed a folder across the desk toward me. I stared down at the papers, the bold words at the top reading termination agreement. I felt my throat tighten, heat rising in my face as my pulse thudded in my ears. "You cannot be serious," I whispered. Derek tilted his head like he was doing me a favor. "We need someone warmer, someone more approachable, someone who makes clients feel like they are walking into sunshine." His words landed like blows, each one knocking the breath out of me. Did he not remember the projects I had saved from disaster? Did he not remember the millions I had cut in wasted costs? Did he not remember the endless nights I had spent fixing problems no one else could solve? Apparently, none of that mattered. Not to him, not to this company. Angela Price, the human resources manager, sat at the corner of his desk, her eyes fixed on her clipboard as though she could not bear to look at me. She was 35, and her silence cut just as deep as Derek's arrogance. It was as if she wanted to disappear into the furniture, rather than witness the humiliation happening right in front of her. "It is nothing personal," she finally mumbled, without lifting her eyes. I wanted to scream at her, to shake her, to demand that she see me. But my voice felt trapped, choked back by disbelief. Nothing personal? How could being fired for the way my face rested ever be anything but personal? I gathered what little dignity I had left, though my hands trembled as I picked up the folder. My mind was spinning, shouting silent questions. Was I not good enough? Was I really so unlikable that a smile could define me? Was I about to lose everything because I refused to play pretend? Derek leaned forward, clasping his hands as if he were closing a casual meeting. "This is for the best," he said in that booming voice of his. "You will find a place that suits your personality." I stared at him, anger and sorrow burning together in my chest, but I could not form words. My career, my security, and my self-worth were being swept away under the flimsiest excuse I had ever heard. When I finally walked out of that office, the hallway seemed longer, colder, and unfamiliar. The building that had once felt like my second home now seemed like a stranger. My colleagues avoided my eyes as though my misfortune was contagious. Some glanced at me with pity, others pretended not to notice, and that hurt even more. I carried a cardboard box filled with my things. Family photos, notes from successful projects, and a small plant that had thrived on my desk for years. The weight of that box felt heavier than it should have, because inside it was not just my belongings. It was 12 years of my life reduced to scraps. As I pushed through the revolving doors and stepped out into the cold March air, the city looked different. The noise of traffic sounded distant, like I was underwater. I kept replaying Derek's words over and over in my head. "You just do not smile enough." That sentence echoed louder than the horns, louder than the footsteps of strangers passing me by, louder than my own heartbeat. That was the day they took my smile away, not because I had lost it, but because they decided it was not enough for them. There are moments in life when a single sentence becomes heavier than a lifetime of effort. And that day in Derek Mason's office, I learned how quickly words could erase years of loyalty. As I stood there holding the termination papers, my heart pounded so loud it felt as if the entire building could hear it. I wanted to believe he was bluffing, or exaggerating, or even joking in the cruelest way possible, but the look on his face told me otherwise. That smug grin, the tilt of his head, the way he tapped his pen against the desk as if he had already moved on to the next task. He had no doubt. He had decided my fate, and he delivered it with the casual arrogance of someone who thought he was untouchable. I remember whispering the words without even realizing I had spoken them. "You cannot be serious." My voice trembled, more fragile than I wanted, as though my entire being was reduced to disbelief. Derek leaned forward, his elbows resting on the desk, and gave me the kind of smile that was meant to sting. We need people who bring energy into the room. Warmth, charm, approachability. Victoria, you are competent, but you are not approachable. You walk in here with that serious face, and it pulls people down. Clients need sunshine, not storms. He said it so smoothly, as though it were a well-rehearsed line. I wanted to shout, to slam my fists against the desk, to list every victory I had delivered for the company, but my throat was locked by the shock of hearing those words spoken aloud. Angela Price from Human Resources shifted uncomfortably in her chair beside him. She was supposed to be the neutral voice, the one who balanced fairness with policy. But she sat there scribbling notes on her clipboard like my pain was just another bullet point in her routine. She did not look up. Not once. It was easier for her to focus on the ink than on my humiliation. "It is nothing personal," she muttered in that quiet, detached tone, but it might as well have been a dagger. I looked at her, desperate for any sign of humanity, but all I saw was avoidance. That sentence, "Nothing personal," echoed in my mind right alongside Derek's, as though they were rehearsed lines from a play I never agreed to join. I thought back to all the nights I had stayed in the office long after everyone else had left, the projects I had rescued when no one believed they could be saved, the numbers I had improved that made investors smile even if I did not. Did those numbers mean nothing? Did those long nights vanish into air the moment Derek decided I was not warm enough? I could feel tears pressing against my eyes, but I swallowed them down, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. Still, I could not stop my voice from shaking as I asked, after everything I have given to this company, after all the results I have delivered, this is what it comes down to. Derek leaned back again, crossing his arms as if he had heard this question 100 times before, and the answer never changed. "This is for the best," he said simply, with no hesitation. "You will find a place that suits your personality better. This company needs faces that inspire confidence." Confidence. That was the word he used. I almost laughed at the irony. Did he not realize that the quiet strength I carried, the seriousness he hated, was the very reason this company survived multiple crises? To him, it was invisible. To him, my strength did not shine brightly enough to blind the room, so it might as well not have existed at all. I signed the papers with a hand that shook so violently I could barely hold the pen. Each stroke of my signature felt like betrayal. Not betrayal of them, but betrayal of myself, as though I was agreeing that their reasoning was valid. Inside, I was screaming that this was unfair, that I had been judged by something so shallow it was laughable, but on the surface I had no choice but to comply. I slid the folder back across the desk and watched Derek glance at it quickly before moving it aside, as if my career, my identity, and my livelihood were just another minor task checked off his list. When I left his office, my legs felt heavy, each step dragging me farther from the person I thought I was. The hallway seemed endless, lined with faces that pretended not to notice me carrying my box of belongings. No one dared to stop me, no one dared to speak, and that silence screamed louder than any words. I had spent over a decade in that building, and in one sentence it was as though I had never been there at all. I kept hearing his voice repeat in my head, "You just do not smile enough." That was the sentence that cut me down, sharper than any blade, deeper than any wound, because it was not just about losing a job. It was about being told that who I was at my core was not enough to belong. As I pushed open the glass doors and stepped outside, the cold air stung my face, and I realized something that both terrified me and set a spark in my chest. They had taken everything I thought I had built, but they had also given me something they did not intend to, a reason to fight. I walked away from that building with tears burning my eyes and fury in my heart, but also with the smallest seed of defiance whispering inside me. One day, I told myself silently, one day this sentence will not define me. It will fuel me. The day I carried that cardboard box out of Everlyn Retail Group felt like a public execution. Every step from Derek Mason's office to the front doors of that glass tower was lined with invisible daggers of pity and avoidance. I had seen others leave before me, people escorted by security or whispered about in hallways, and I used to wonder what it felt like to be in their shoes. That morning, I did not have to wonder anymore. I was living it, and it was far crueler than I ever imagined. I held the box tight against my chest, the edges cutting into my palms, though it was not heavy with things. A photo of my parents, a coffee mug from my first year, some files I had poured my heart into, and a small jade plant that had grown beside me for years. None of it weighed much, but together, it felt like I was dragging 12 years of my life stuffed into a container that could be dropped and forgotten at any moment. My shoes echoed against the polished floor, and I could feel the eyes of my colleagues watching me without truly looking. It was the kind of silence that screams louder than words, the silence of people too afraid to acknowledge what was happening because they did not want to be next. When I passed the open office area, I caught the eye of Martin Green, a coworker I had mentored for years. He was 31, bright, eager, and always grateful for my guidance. But when our eyes met, he quickly turned to his screen. The sting of that rejection made me bite down hard to keep from crying. All I wanted in that moment was for someone, anyone, to say, "This is wrong. We will miss you. You mattered here." But no one spoke. Not Angela Price from Human Resources, who had sat in silence. Not the assistants who had always asked for my advice. Not the managers who had praised me in private meetings. Everyone turned into shadows that refused to see me. When the elevator doors closed in front of me, I let out a breath I had been holding for too long. My reflection stared back at me in the mirrored walls. My eyes red, my jaw clenched, my lips pressed thin. Not smiling enough? That phrase replayed in my mind like a cruel chant. I touched my face, as if examining myself for the flaw Derek had named. But all I saw was a tired woman who had given everything and received nothing in return. By the time the elevator reached the lobby, my legs felt like they might give out. The receptionist at the front desk gave me a glance filled with something between sympathy and relief that it was not her walking out. She did not say goodbye. She did not wish me luck. She just lowered her gaze, and I understood. In that place, silence was safer than kindness. I pushed through the revolving doors, and the cold March air hit me like a slap. The sound of the city was jarring. The honk of taxis, the buzz of conversations, the distant wail of sirens. Yet all of it felt muted compared to the roar inside my head. I walked down the street, clutching that box like it was my only anchor, and felt humiliation burn hotter with every step. My phone buzzed with a message from a friend at work, a single line, "I am so sorry. Keep your chin up." I wanted to throw the phone against the pavement. Sorry? Keep my chin up? Was that all I deserved after 12 years? I found myself whispering out loud, "Did none of it matter?" The question hung in the air like smoke, and the passersby gave me curious looks, but I did not care. By the time I reached the subway station, I stopped and sat on a bench, staring at the ground. I could not bring myself to go home right away. Home meant facing the emptiness, the bills, the uncertainty of tomorrow. Home meant telling my family that after years of stability, I had been discarded for something as absurd as not smiling enough. The shame was overwhelming, not just because of what Derek had said, but because a part of me believed him. I wondered if I truly had been too serious, too distant, too focused. Maybe I had made myself invisible in ways that invited this dismissal. That thought was the cruelest of all, because it made me question everything I thought I knew about myself. A woman sat down beside me on the bench, a stranger with shopping bags and a bright scarf. She glanced at my box and gave me a polite smile, the kind of smile Derek would have approved of. I tried to return it, but my lips would not move. Instead, I lowered my head and whispered to myself, "They took my smile away." And in that moment, I realized it was not just about losing a job. It was about losing a piece of myself. I was not sure I could ever recover. That was how I walked out that day. Not with pride, not with dignity, but with shame clinging to me like a second skin. And yet, deep inside, beneath the humiliation and the hurt, there was the faintest spark. It was not hope yet, not even close. But it was anger. Anger that one shallow judgment had erased 12 years. Anger that no one spoke up. Anger that I had been made to feel small for being exactly who I was. That anger would become something more later, though I could not see it then. All I knew was that shame had marked me, and I would carry it home in that box, along with the last remnants of the life they had so easily thrown away. The first weeks after losing my job felt like falling into a well with no bottom. I would wake up in the morning, sunlight pressing through the blinds, and for a split second, I would believe everything was normal. Then it would hit me like a punch to the chest. There was no office to go to, no team waiting for my leadership, no paycheck on the way. Just silence. Silence and the heavy weight of shame that clung to me no matter how hard I tried to shake it. I used to wake up with purpose, but now I dragged myself out of bed like a ghost, moving through a house that suddenly felt too large, too quiet, and too unforgiving. Bills piled up on the kitchen counter, each envelope a reminder that my world was not going to pause for me to recover. The mortgage payment, the utility bill, the insurance notice. They arrived like clockwork, demanding answers I did not have. I stared at them every morning with a mix of dread and anger, whispering, if only they knew why. But the world did not care that I had been fired for not smiling enough. The world only cared that I had lost the steady stream of income that once kept everything afloat. I could feel the walls of my life closing in, one bill, one deadline, one overdue notice at a time. Sleep became a stranger. At night, I would toss and turn, staring at the ceiling, replaying Derek Mason's words again and again. You just do not smile enough. That phrase carved itself into my mind like graffiti I could not erase. I would imagine all the times I had stayed late, saving projects no one else could handle, and wonder if I should have forced a smile while I did it. I began to doubt myself in ways I never had before. Was I really too serious? Did people avoid me because of my face? Was I blind to how others saw me? These questions poisoned my confidence, turning my once steady sense of self into a fragile shell. Even the people around me, people I thought I could lean on, did not know what to say. A few friends called, their voices filled with pity. You will find something else soon, Victoria. Keep your head up. But their words felt empty, like handing someone a cup of water when they are drowning. My mother tried to comfort me, reminding me of my strengths, but even her words slid off me like water against stone. And then there were the whispers I overheard from neighbors when they thought I could not hear. She lost her job. Poor thing. Maybe she should lighten up. You know, smile more. That cut deeper than Derek's sentence ever could, because it told me his judgment was spreading like a stain on my reputation. I began avoiding people altogether. I would leave my house only when I absolutely had to, walking with my head down, hoping not to run into anyone I knew. Grocery shopping felt like a stage where everyone could see my failure written on my face. I convinced myself that strangers were staring, that they could somehow sense my humiliation. I stopped answering phone calls. I ignored invitations. Isolation wrapped itself around me, tighter every day, until I could hardly breathe without feeling its grip. Some nights, I sat at the kitchen table in the dark, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the wall. I would rest my head on the table, staring at the stack of unpaid bills, and whisper to myself, what did I do wrong? Over and over. I was not asking Derek anymore. I was asking myself. And that was the most dangerous part of those weeks. The way his sentence had burrowed into my soul until I was the one repeating it back, convincing myself it was true. The darkness made everything taste bitter. Meals lost their flavor. Coffee became nothing more than hot water. I skipped breakfast, sometimes even dinner, because food seemed pointless when the pit in my stomach was already full of despair. My clothes hung looser, not because I was taking care of myself, but because I was not the woman I had once been. The sharp, confident leader who could handle anything was dissolving day by day into someone I barely recognized. And yet, in that darkness, something else began to stir. It was not hope, not yet. Hope was too bright a word for what I felt. It was more like defiance, a quiet, stubborn ember that refused to die. Every time Derek's words echoed in my mind, every time I heard the whispers of pity or mockery, that ember flickered. I did not know what to do with it yet. I did not know how to feed it. But it was there, faint but alive, waiting for the moment I would finally be ready to turn my anger into action. Those weeks nearly broke me. They stripped away my confidence, my pride, and my sense of worth. But sometimes, you have to be broken before you can rebuild. Sometimes, you have to walk through the darkest nights before you can even imagine seeing the dawn. I did not know it then, but those weeks of darkness were not the end of me. They were the beginning of something I could not yet see, something that would one day turn the very shame I carried into the weapon that saved me. It was not a sudden burst of inspiration that pulled me out of the darkness. It was something quieter, smaller, but powerful enough to shift the weight pressing down on me. I remember the exact moment the spark appeared. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon, and I was sitting on my couch surrounded by unopened bills, staring blankly at the television. Some business program was on in the background, a guest expert talking about how small companies were struggling with efficiency. They are losing millions because they do not know how to streamline their systems, the man said. His words sliced through my fog like a blade. I leaned forward, almost in disbelief. Efficiency. That was what I had done best. That was my gift. And for the first time in weeks, I heard a voice in my head that did not belong to Derek Mason. It was my own voice, whispering, "You know how to fix that." The idea clung to me like a lifeline. I grabbed a notepad from the coffee table and started scribbling. Ideas flowed, not perfectly, not smoothly, but urgently. By the time the rain stopped outside, I had mapped out the outline of a small consulting service. Just me, my laptop, and the skills that had once saved Everlyn Retail Group from disaster more times than I could count. The thought terrified me. I had never considered working for myself. I had always been the loyal employee, the steady architect behind someone else's empire. But after what Derek had done, after the humiliation of being discarded like I was nothing, I realized I had nothing left to lose. The first step was the hardest. I built a simple website with a name I thought sounded professional. Hail Solutions. It was nothing fancy, just a homepage, a description of my services, and a contact form. I sent emails to small businesses in Denver, offering to review their operations and help them cut costs. Most never replied. A few said no. But then, one local retailer responded. "We cannot afford much," the owner, Susan Bradley, wrote back. "But if you think you can help us, we will give you a chance." That was all I needed. Walking into Susan's store for the first time, I felt a nervous energy buzzing through me. It was not like stepping into Everlyn's glass tower. This was a modest shop with squeaky floors, shelves that needed organizing, and employees who looked overworked. Susan was in her early 50s, warm but exhausted, and she welcomed me with a smile that was genuine, not forced. "I do not need you to smile," she said, almost as if she had read my mind. "I need you to save my business." Those words struck me like lightning. For once, someone cared about what I could do, not how I looked doing it. I threw myself into the work. I analyzed their sales, reorganized their supply chain, and trained their team on efficiency. Within weeks, Susan's business started to stabilize. She was so grateful that she nearly cried when she handed me the modest check for my services. It was not much money, not enough to cover even one of my bills, but it was not about the amount. It was about proving to myself that my skills had value outside the walls of Everlyn. For the first time since Derek's sentence had cut me down, I felt a flicker of pride again. Word spread faster than I expected. Susan referred me to another business, and then another. Each one was small, struggling, desperate for help, and I gave them everything I had. I worked late into the night, fueled not by fear anymore, but by determination. I may not have been smiling, but I was working, building, proving myself piece by piece. Within 6 months, I had more clients than I could handle alone. I hired 2 part-time assistants. By the end of the year, Hale Solutions was no longer a fragile idea scribbled in a notebook. It was a growing business with a reputation for results. And here is the part that still amazes me. The very thing Derek mocked me for. My seriousness, my focus, my unwillingness to plaster a fake smile became the reason people trusted me. Clients told me, "You look like you mean business. That is why we believe you." What he saw as weakness, others saw as strength. What he tried to use to destroy me became the foundation I built upon. The spark had turned into a flame. It was not roaring yet, but it was alive, and it lit a path I had never imagined for myself. I was no longer asking what I did wrong. I was no longer replaying his cruel words like a broken record. Instead, I was asking, what can I do next? How far can I take this? In the weeks of darkness, I had thought I was finished. But with that spark, I realized I was only just beginning. Derek Mason had fired me for not smiling enough. What he did not realize was that my seriousness was not a flaw. It was the very weapon that would one day undo him. By the spring of 2023, Hale Solutions was no longer a fragile seed of an idea. It was a living, breathing business that demanded my full attention. I had 6 employees by then, each one hungry to prove themselves. And every week we added another client who came to us because they had heard, "Victoria will fix it." Those words became my new fuel. Every success built on the ruins of my old humiliation. I still remember Derek Mason's sentence like a scar carved into my memory, but it no longer haunted me the same way. It had started to transform, hardening into something sharper, something I could use. One evening, after a long day of meetings, I sat at my desk scrolling through industry news. It was a habit I had kept from my years at Everlyn Retail Group. Staying updated on trends, contracts, mergers, and failures. But this time, the headlines felt different. My eyes froze when I saw it. Everlyn Retail Group faces financial turmoil amidst falling profits. The article went on to describe how the company had lost several major clients. Their stock price had dropped, and investors were growing restless. I read every line twice, my chest tightening with a strange mix of disbelief and vindication. The empire that had cast me aside for not smiling enough was crumbling under its own arrogance. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. A part of me wanted to laugh, loud and unrestrained, but another part whispered caution. This was just one article, just one glimpse into their troubles. Companies as big as Everlyn had weathered storms before. Still, I could not ignore the wave of satisfaction rising inside me. For months, I had carried shame like a shadow, convinced that I was the problem, that I had been too serious, too distant. Now here was proof, plain and public, that the problem had never been me. It had been them all along. The next day, during lunch with my operations manager, Daniel Cruz, a 36-year-old with sharp instincts and a relentless work ethic, I mentioned the article. He raised an eyebrow and smiled knowingly. "Poetic justice?" he said between bites of his sandwich. "You give 12 years to that place. They throw you out over nonsense. And now look at them. Falling apart." His words should have satisfied me, but instead they sparked something deeper. I did not just want them to fall apart. I wanted to see what would happen when the very woman they underestimated stood above their wreckage. Weeks went by, and more articles followed. Headlines about mismanagement, about Derek Mason's poor leadership decisions, about executives leaving with golden parachutes while employees were laid off in waves. Each report hit me like a reminder from fate itself. Watch closely. Victoria. Their time is running out. I collected those articles, printed them, and pinned them on a board in my office. Not out of obsession, but out of focus. I wanted a record of their decline, a trail of proof that arrogance had consequences. I remember one evening, sitting with my accountant, Melissa Chan, who was 39, brilliant with numbers, and unafraid to tell me the truth. She looked up from the financial reports of Hale Solutions and said, "If they keep slipping like this, Victoria, someone is going to buy them cheap. Companies like that do not just vanish. They get swallowed." The thought made my pulse quicken. The idea of Everlyn, the place that humiliated me, the place that threw me away. Becoming vulnerable enough for someone like me to even consider stepping in was intoxicating. I tried to push the thought away, but it lingered like a secret I was not ready to say out loud. At night, I would lie in bed replaying those images, me walking back into that building, not as the woman carrying a cardboard box of shame, but as the woman holding the keys to their future. I could almost see Derek's face, pale and stunned, as he realized the very person he fired had risen higher than he ever imagined. That fantasy was sweet, almost too sweet, and I scolded myself for indulging in it. But the more Everlyn faltered, the stronger the fantasy became. The first glimpse of revenge was not in a grand confrontation or a loud declaration. It was in the quiet satisfaction of knowing the truth was unfolding before my eyes. They had dismissed me as if I were nothing, but without me, they were unraveling. And while they sank deeper into their crisis, I was climbing, step by steady step, into a position I had never dared to dream of. I clipped the latest article, pinned it to the board, and whispered to myself, "This is only the beginning." I did not know then how close I was to turning that glimpse into reality, but I knew one thing with certainty. Fate had handed me the first taste of justice, and I was hungry for more. It was early 2024 when the phone call came, a call that would change everything. I was in my office at Hale Solutions, reviewing quarterly numbers with my finance team, when my cell phone buzzed. The caller ID showed the name of Robert Lang, a venture partner I had met months earlier at a conference. Robert was in his 50s, shrewd, calculating, and the kind of man who rarely wasted his time on small talk. When I answered, his voice was brisk, straight to the point. Victoria, I think you will want to hear this. Everlyn Retail Group is looking for a buyer. They are desperate. You should take a look. For a moment, I forgot to breathe. My chest tightened, my pen slipped from my fingers, and I stared at the wall as his words sank in. The very company that had fired me 2 years earlier for not smiling enough was now on its knees, seeking rescue. I forced myself to keep my voice steady. Send me everything you have, I told him, though my hands were trembling. When the documents arrived, I spent hours at my desk, poring over their financial statements. What I saw made my pulse race. They were drowning in debt, losing clients, bleeding cash from bloated overhead, and holding on to outdated systems I had once begged them to fix. Derek Mason had driven the ship straight into the rocks. I called my operations manager, Daniel Cruz, into my office. He took one look at the Everlyn file on my desk and raised his eyebrows. You are not seriously thinking. He began, but I cut him off. Yeah, I am. He sat down, disbelief spreading across his face. Victoria, this is huge. This is not like helping a small retailer save on supply chains. This is an empire. Buying them would take more than money. It would take guts. I leaned forward, my voice firm. Daniel, they underestimated me once. I will not let them do it again. This is not just about money. This is about proving who I am and who they were wrong about. The weeks that followed were a blur of negotiations, meetings, and sleepless nights. Robert connected me with investors who had been watching Everlyn's decline with interest. They knew Hale Solutions was rising fast, and they trusted me because I had already built a reputation for delivering results. Together, we crafted a deal. I would put in my share of capital. Every penny I had saved, every ounce of credit I could risk, while investors covered the rest. The offer, $2.3 million to acquire Everlyn Retail Group. For a company that had once been valued at over 10 times that, the price was staggering. But desperation makes even giants stumble. I will never forget the day the deal closed. I sat in a boardroom across from Everlyn's remaining executives, men and women who had once dismissed me as forgettable, unapproachable, not worth keeping. They tried to mask their shame with stiff smiles, but their eyes betrayed them. Papers slid across the table. Pens scratched signatures. And with each stroke of ink, the power shifted. When the final document was signed, Robert leaned back and whispered to me, "Congratulations, Victoria. You own them now." I walked out of that building feeling taller than I ever had in my life. The same glass tower where I once carried a cardboard box of humiliation was now mine, piece by piece, floor by floor. I stood on the sidewalk, staring up at its shining windows, and whispered, "You took my smile away. Now I take your crown." The city lights reflected on the glass, but I saw my own reflection too. Not broken, not discarded, but standing, unshaken, unstoppable. The following week, I called a company-wide meeting. Employees filled the auditorium, their whispers rippling like a storm. Some recognized me, some did not, but every eye was fixed on the stage when I walked out. I stood at the podium, steady and calm, and let the silence build. Then I spoke. 2 years ago, I was told I did not smile enough to belong here. Today, I stand before you as the new owner of Everlyn Retail Group. Gasps filled the room, then cheers, then thunderous applause. Faces lit up. Not with forced grins, but with genuine relief. They were tired of Derek Mason's empty leadership. They were ready for something real. That day, I did not just buy a company. I bought back my dignity. I bought back every ounce of worth they tried to strip from me. And I made myself a promise. Under my watch, no one would ever again be judged for something as shallow as a smile. Results would matter. Integrity would matter. Respect would matter. The deal of a lifetime was not just about money. It was about justice. It was about turning shame into triumph. And as I looked at the faces in that room, I knew the story was no longer just mine. It was theirs, too. Together, we were going to rebuild Everlyn. Not as the company that discarded me, but as the company that proved the underestimated can rise higher than anyone imagined. The morning I walked back into Everlyn's glass tower, the air felt different. It was sharp, electric, almost humming with fate. 2 years earlier, I had left that building carrying a cardboard box filled with scraps of my life. Now, I stepped through the same revolving doors with the deed of ownership tucked in my bag. My heels clicked against the marble floor, each step echoing like a drumbeat of victory. People turned their heads. Whispers followed me down the hallway. Some recognized me immediately. Others stared with curiosity, sensing something monumental was about to happen. The receptionist, a young woman with nervous eyes, stood up as I approached. "Good morning, Ms. Hale," she stammered. For a moment, I saw her glance at my face, perhaps searching for the smile Derek Mason had once demanded. But I did not smile. I did not need to. Instead, I gave a small nod and said, "Please inform everyone. There will be an all-staff meeting in the auditorium in 30 minutes. She blinked, then rushed to make the call. The message rippled through the building like wildfire. By the time I reached the elevator, the entire tower seemed to be buzzing. I took the ride alone, staring at my reflection in the mirrored walls. The woman staring back at me was not the same woman who had left in shame 2 years earlier. My posture was straight, my eyes steady, my presence unshaken. I whispered under my breath, "You belong here now. And not just here. You own it." The doors opened, and as I stepped out, I could already hear the shuffle of hundreds of employees making their way to the auditorium. When I walked onto the stage, the room fell silent. Hundreds of faces stared at me. Faces filled with curiosity, doubt, and quiet hope. I paused for a moment, letting the silence settle. My heart was pounding, but my voice was calm and clear when I finally spoke. 2 years ago, I was told I did not smile enough to be valuable to this company. Today, I stand before you as the new owner of Everlyn Retail Group. A gasp rippled through the room, followed by a wave of applause that grew louder and louder until it thundered off the walls. I felt the energy shift in that moment. They were ready to believe. In the crowd, I spotted him. Derek Mason. His once confident shoulders were slumped, his face pale, his jaw tight. He sat in the back row, staring at me like he had seen a ghost. Our eyes locked for a brief second, and I could see the memory flicker in his mind. The day he had fired me, the smug smile on his face when he said I was not warm enough. Now that smugness was gone, replaced by fear, I held his gaze for only a moment, then turned back to the audience. From this day forward, I continued, this company will not judge people by the shape of their smiles. We will judge by results, by integrity, and by respect. The days of shallow leadership are over. We are going to rebuild Everlyn, not through appearances, but through substance. The applause erupted again, this time with cheers. Employees rose to their feet, clapping, shouting. some even wiping tears from their eyes. After the meeting, as people crowded around me to shake my hand and offer their support, Derek tried to approach. His voice was unsteady, no longer booming with arrogance. "Victoria, perhaps we can work something out. I can still offer." I stopped him with a raised hand. My tone was calm, but final. "Derek, you once told me I was not enough. Today, I tell you, you are not what this company needs. You are free to find another place that values your kind of leadership. This one is under new rules." His lips parted as if to argue, but no words came. He turned, shoulders heavy, and walked out of the room. Watching him go was not satisfying in the way I thought it might be. It was not revenge. It was justice. As the day went on, I walked through every floor, shaking hands, listening to employees, making promises I intended to keep. People looked at me not with fear, but with relief, even gratitude. They had been hungry for leadership that saw them as more than props in a corporate performance. I gave them that, not because I needed to prove anything to Derek anymore, but because I had proven it to myself. Walking back into Everlyn was not about reclaiming what had been taken from me. It was about showing everyone, including myself, that dignity can be stolen, but it can also be rebuilt. That shame can be temporary, but strength can be permanent. And as I stood once again in that building, no longer a discarded employee, but its leader, I realized I had not just walked back in, I had risen above it. The days following my return to Everlyn were a storm of transition. Meetings stacked on top of meetings, decisions to be made, systems to be repaired. Yet through it all, I felt lighter than I had in years. Each step I took inside that building felt like reclaiming ground that had once swallowed me whole. But there was one final piece of unfinished business. The man who had cut me down with a single sentence, Derek Mason. He had not left quietly. Even after I dismissed him in front of the staff, he tried to maneuver behind the scenes. I heard whispers from department heads that Derek was reaching out, offering advice, trying to maintain influence as if the company could not possibly run without him. Old habits die hard, especially for men who mistake arrogance for leadership. One morning, my assistant handed me a message. Derek wanted a private meeting. My first instinct was to ignore it, but something inside me said otherwise. Sometimes, justice needs to be spoken aloud. When he walked into my office, I barely recognized him. His once confident stride was slower, his eyes darting nervously. He was still dressed in his tailored suit, but it hung differently now, as though it no longer fit the man he had become. He sat across from me, forcing a smile I knew too well. "Victoria," he began, "we had our differences, but you must admit I shaped this company. My experience could still be of use to you." I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands. "Your experience," I said evenly, "drove this company into the ground. You lost clients, you lost investors, and you nearly lost the trust of every employee here. That is not experience I need." He flinched at my words, but I did not stop. "Do you remember what you told me 2 years ago, Derek? You said I did not smile enough, that I was not warm enough, not approachable enough. And yet here we are. You asking me for a place at the table, me sitting where you once sat." His eyes dropped to the desk, shame flickering across his face. For a moment, I almost felt pity. Almost. But then I remembered the humiliation of walking out with my box of belongings, the silence of colleagues who dared not speak, the weeks of darkness that nearly crushed me. I remembered neighbors whispering that maybe I should smile more. I remembered every sleepless night replaying his sentence until I doubted myself. That memory stiffened my voice. You fired me for not smiling enough. But Derek, it was your false smiles that destroyed this company, not my serious face. You do not belong here anymore. He tried once more, his voice cracking. I can change. I can be different. But his words sounded hollow, rehearsed, just another performance. I stood, signaling the end of our meeting. No, Derek, you cannot change what has already been done, and I will not let you repeat it. Your time here is over. He rose slowly, his shoulders sagging, his eyes avoiding mine. For the first time in all the years I had known him, he looked small, not powerful, not confident, just small. He walked out of my office without another word, and I knew I would never see him again in these halls. Watching him go, I expected triumph. What I felt instead was closure. It was not about revenge anymore. It was about justice. The scales had finally balanced. That afternoon, I gathered my leadership team. We sat around the conference table, the same one where Derek once held court with his booming voice. I looked at each of them. Daniel Cruz, who had stood by me, Melissa Chan, who had guided me through the financial risks, and others who had quietly endured Derek's reign. From this day forward, I told them, Everlyn will not be a place of fear. It will not be a place where appearances matter more than substance. We will build something real. We will respect the people who keep this company alive. Heads nodded. Eyes brightened. It was the beginning of something new. That night, as I walked through the quiet building, I passed the very spot where I had once carried my box of belongings, my head bowed in shame. I stopped, standing in that place, and for a moment I closed my eyes. I could almost see my younger self walking out, humiliated, broken. But now I stood tall. That younger version of me would never have believed what we had become. I whispered softly, "We made it. They cannot take that from us again." The moment of poetic justice was not Derek's downfall. It was my rise. His arrogance had been my undoing, but my persistence had become his replacement. That is justice. Not revenge born of spite, but victory born of truth. And as I left the building that night, the city lights glowing outside, I felt a peace I had not known in years. The story had come full circle. Owning Everlyn Retail Group did not feel like the ending of my story. It felt like the beginning of something greater. In the months that followed, I poured every ounce of myself into rebuilding what Derek Mason and his board had nearly destroyed. We restructured departments, cut waste, and invested in people who had been overlooked for far too long. Slowly, the numbers began to turn upward. But what mattered even more to me were the faces of the employees. They no longer walked the halls with fear in their eyes. They carried themselves with pride again, and for the first time in years, I could see hope rising inside the building's walls. I made one promise to myself and to them. Never again would anyone be judged by something as shallow as the curve of their lips. I stood in front of the entire company during a quarterly meeting and said, "Your worth here will never be measured by the expression on your face. It will be measured by your dedication, your results, and your integrity. You do not have to force joy to belong. You only have to bring your truth." The applause that followed was not polite. It was thunderous. I knew in that moment that we were finally becoming a company built on respect instead of performance theater. Sometimes, when I sat in my office late at night, I would catch myself staring out at the city lights, remembering the night I carried that cardboard box out in shame. I thought about how heavy it had felt, not because of the objects inside, but because of the humiliation it represented. And then I would look around my office now, an office that once belonged to Derek, and feel the strange symmetry of life. The very place where I had been told I was not enough had become the place where I proved I was more than enough. Fate has a way of writing endings we could never imagine. I also thought often about that phrase, the one that haunted me for months. You just do not smile enough. For a long time, it felt like a wound, a scar that would never heal. But over time, I realized it had given me something unexpected. It had forced me to confront who I really was, not who others wanted me to pretend to be. I was not the kind of person who smiled through empty words or false promises. I was serious, focused, and relentless. And those very traits had built Hale Solutions and carried me back to Everlyn. The thing they said was my flaw had become my strength. One afternoon, a young employee named Sarah stopped by my office. She was only 25, just starting her career, and she hesitated at the door before finally blurting out, "Miss Hale, I just wanted to thank you. I used to worry every day about how I looked here, about whether I was cheerful enough, friendly enough, like I was being judged on everything but my work. Since you came back, I feel free to just do my job and be myself." Her voice shook with honesty. I smiled. Not because I had to, but because it was real. And I said, "Sarah, that is exactly what this company should be about." When she left, I sat quietly for a while, letting her words settle into my heart. That was the moment I knew my fight had been worth it. I do not pretend that my journey was easy. The weeks of darkness nearly swallowed me, and the shame I carried cut deeper than I ever admitted at the time. But I stand here now as living proof that being underestimated does not mean being defeated. Sometimes the greatest insults can become the strongest weapons, if you refuse to let them define you. Derek Mason thought he was cutting me down when he fired me. In reality, he planted the seed of the empire I would later build. So here is the lesson I leave you with. Do not let anyone reduce your worth to something superficial. Do not let their shallow judgments define your truth. Whether you smile often or rarely, whether you are loud or quiet, whether you shine like the sun or move steadily like the tide, your value lies in what you bring, not in what they demand. Let your results speak louder than their criticism. And when the time comes, let your triumph be the answer to every doubt they ever cast upon you. Today, when I walk through the halls of Everlyn, I no longer carry shame. I carry purpose. And though Derek Mason once told me I did not smile enough, I can tell you this. I smile now. Not because I have to, not because it is demanded. I smile because I won.